you get to to walk right up, be part of it, and then he'll end up throwing you in. That's what you really want to do. You want to get off the bench again and play again, huh?
Freedom.
Awesome. All right then, in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, listeners. So glad to have you back. This is the Agents of Recovery podcast. Thank you so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Please jump on there. Write us a review. It helps immensely to help push this podcast out further, to help affect those who might be struggling with any kind of addiction or mental health. Give them some words of encouragement. So please jump on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on and write us a review and share this with anyone who may be struggling with addiction or mental health. I want to give, as always, a very warm welcome to our co-host, the guest, the Agents of Recovery themselves, Mr. Brock Bevel. Brock, how's life treating you this week?
Man, it's been a good week, except my freaking Cardinals beat my team today, dude. I don't know if you guys saw that, but man, that was a heartbreaking, man. So, yeah, no, it's been a good week. I'm excited. I'm really, really pumped up about this topic. I know there's a lot going on in the air, man. There's a lot of people being affected by what we're going to talk about today, so I'm ready to get in it. What's up, Max?
Max Hall, as always, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, yo, thank you. I agree, man. It's good to be on. There's lots of stuff to talk about. Just a quick side note, I'm excited where this thing is going. We're starting to reach more and more people. We were talking about it before we just got on. Blue was bringing it up. More and more people are listening, and it just goes to show how many people are affected by this whole thing, whether it's mental health or addiction or whatever. So appreciate the listeners, and please keep sharing it with other people, because I've received some feedback that it's really changing lives and doing good. So share it if you know anybody that can listen to it, and thank you to the
Absolutely.
listeners.
And for those that tuned in last week and kind of heard our response to some of the shenanigans and some of the sideline goofiness that went down, I want to thank you for joining the podcast. So to all you new listeners, welcome. It's good to have you here. Go back, listen to the others. There's a lot of deep resource here, but more so, it's three real guys talking about real life issues, and some of the things we want to address today is things that we've been seeing, not just in the media, but in our own lives, and that is the difference between the freedoms of recovery versus the captivities of addiction, and what freedom we kind of take for granted when we think that we can live carefree and use and simplify life by just having a little extra checkout time with a substance of choice, but really how fast that can switch on you and turn from something that feels like freedom into something that's really a version of captivity. And in captivity, usually the only way out of something so deep is institutions, jail, or death. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between those things, but really the freedom of sobriety, the freedom of recovery, the freedom that life provides when you start turning the mess into the message. Brock, let's kick it off with you, brother. You kind of saw this kind of in the lines by which we were reading and talking about today. Kick us off with your interpretations of the difference between the two. Well,
here's what I do know. I know that when I was in active addiction, I did not have freedom. In a lot of people, I mean, it felt like I had freedom. I felt like I was free to choose. It felt like I could make any decision I wanted to. It felt like because I destroyed my relationships, I was alone, single man, I could just do what I wanted. But what happened was I noticed that there's freedom in the discipline of recovery, if that makes sense. When I look at the polarity, what is that?
Polarity.
Polarity, thank you. The black and white of it, I noticed that I have more freedoms now in active recovery than I did in active addiction, because the chase for the drug, the need for the drug, I could only think about one thing, and that was just getting high enough to where, okay, now I can deal. But if I could have taken that variable away, I was in trouble. I don't know if and that's kind of what I want to get into. Is I want people to understand, number one, that just because you see somebody in active addiction doesn't mean that they feel free, that they have freedom. They're actually way more handcuffed in the decisions they're making than they are free to choose, because of the connection and the hook that substance has in them. Max, did that kind of make sense? Maybe you can kind of pull all the covers away and share that with me.
Well, think of it as this, think of an addict, okay? And the routine of an addict is actually very simple. Okay? It's wake up, find your drug of choice, use it, look for more, use it, and that just gets repeated over and over and over again, and nothing else really matters. So when we talk about being a slave, it's, in my opinion, the biggest thing is the mental slavery that we put ourselves in, and it becomes to where we have to do it in order, like you just said, Brock, in order to do anything else. In order to go to the grocery store, I got to get high before I go to the grocery store or go to work or whatever that might be. And we enslave ourselves to this whole concept of it. And then depending on your drug, it can become a physical thing too, to where you have to have it physically in order to be able to function. So when we talk about the slavery part of it, that's what we're talking about. And you lose focus of the bigger perspective of everything. You lose the perspective of your family or your job or what your purpose is. We've talked about our why. You lose all that, and you're stuck in this routine that just goes over and over and over again, to where you just kind of put yourself in this dark place, this dark cloud that you can't get out of. But the reality of it is, the only person that can get you out of that mental slavery is yourself. And so when you're able to get sober and you stop using the drugs, then there's the mental work that comes with it in order to get yourself to what we're talking about, the freedom spot of sobriety, to where you're not enslaved to this daily routine of having to get it, use it, get it, use it. And the anxiety and the stress that goes with that of being able to find more and use more is the downfall of addiction. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't get why you can't just stop that routine and stop using drugs, because from the outside looking in, it seems crazy. It's like, why don't you stop? You're destroying your life, but you've become a slave to it. It takes it over. So the only person that can really stop that is ourselves. And so that, I just wanted to kind of go into detail there of what we're talking about losing your freedoms, because it's taken over your mind to where you can't think or function without it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Max.
Yeah.
And Blue, maybe you guys can both kick in, because you have a lot of people that are listening saying, this dude, he picked drugs over his family. He picked drugs over going back to school. He's picking drugs over his kids. And so go to that and speak on that, because I want to know how you can help somebody that's listening to this understand how there is so much draw to that drug. And like you said, that enslavement of just needing the high versus needing to be at home. Need to be, right? Being high versus need to be with your wife. You look at Max's wife, Blue's wife, Brock's wife, beautiful people, right? And then people are like, well, why wouldn't Max want to be at home? Why wouldn't he want to be with his kids? Why is he out chasing the drugs? So I want to go into detail of that why and the power that this drug has over us.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying right before we started recording, freedom kind of defined down as kind of loosely like the state of being free or free from confinement, either physical or mental confinement. So freedom is the opposite of those things. But I look at it through the windows of an agent, as we are, the agents of recovery, live under the premise that freedom is something we must choose. If you're a victim to something, a victim to addiction, then you might choose the agency under maybe confinement or under the premise of security. Like, I've got to have this like security blanket in order to go on vacation with my family or go to the grocery store, like Max was talking about. But the difference between that is funny, because most people live in a world where they want to create that job security, that financial security. But at what cost? Because if we try to achieve maximum security, that sounds a lot like prison. But people in recovery, early in recovery, they're afraid of freedom, because freedom comes with an abundant amount of choices. It comes with consequences. And some consequences are good, some are bad. I mean, you start getting free from addiction, all of a sudden you start having responsibilities like bills and like mortgages and like relationship building. And that's kind of hard and scary too. When you're high, you don't care about those things. You just try to, eke your way through it. So I love what you're asking. It's a deep question, but I think it's our mindset. We're trying to find security in using. To what point? Either we can have freedom or we can be captive to it. It's a hard thing to choose, And even if we're confined, even if we're in prison, literal prison, behind bars, you can still find a sense of freedom there. I think it's all in how you look at it. What do you think, Max?
I think that's some good stuff there. And, you know, I hate it when people say that, because when I say that, you're choosing the drugs over your family or being at home or whatever, because it's not true. Okay? If you pulled me aside in my addiction and asked me what was more important, I would tell you my family. It is. But when you become subject to addiction, there's the part of your brain that tells you, and I forget the name of it, tells you you're hungry, you're thirsty, your sex drive, all of that stuff, when you need to go to sleep. It takes that part over to where you're not thinking about even just basic, life essentials.
Brain,
yeah. And it says, no, forget all that. We need this. This is what we need. If we have this, we'll be okay. We'll feel better. We think we're in a better mood. We think when we are at home with our family, we're happier and I'm a better dad, or I'm better at work. And it's just not the case. That's the cloud that gets put over us, and our whole perspective changes. So no, I'm not necessarily choosing this over my family. If you straight up ask me, I'd say, yes, my family is more important. But the problem is I have a mental illness, right? I have a disease, or whatever you want to call it, that has taken over my brain, and it doesn't allow me to think clearly. It doesn't allow me to have a perspective of what I'm doing and where I'm at in my life. And so gaining that perspective back is part of sobriety, but people need to understand this isn't necessarily a choice in the matter of fact, I'm choosing this over my family. But it has taken away my thought process to make a choice and be free from that, if that makes any sense of what I'm saying. Because I'm so clouded to it, as opposed to everything else in my life, that nothing else matters until I get this. That doesn't mean I don't love my wife and my family and I don't want to be with them. And if you stop me, I would say I want to be with them. Okay? But that dark voice and that cloud that's over us just takes over, and we lose focus. We lose focus of the whole thing. So I hate when people say that, because that's not true. We're not necessarily choosing this. We have choices, and we can change our behavior based on choices, but without help and perspective from others, it is almost impossible, to do. There's rare people like Brock who all of a sudden just said, you know what, I'm making this choice, and we're able to do it. I couldn't do that. I made that choice, or at least I thought I did, multiple times. And I said, boom, I'm done. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to go through the withdrawals, and I'm going to move on. 2 days into the withdrawal, I'm back at it. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, people need to understand it takes over your brain, and it clouds your judgment to where you don't have necessarily the freedom of choice, because you have to have this in order to function. So yes, I do believe there's choice in it. Like, we chose to start using the drugs. We chose that path, and we can choose sobriety, but without somebody helping us refocus, it's really hard for an addict.
Yeah, how many people right now, thank you, that was phenomenal, Max, and it makes me giggle, because I'm starting to think about this. How many times I felt like I was empowered, and then I woke up in the most vicarious situation with people I didn't know, in beds where I was like, what is happening? Right? I thought I had this power. I thought I knew where I was going. I made these decisions, and all of a sudden I end up right back in this bad situation. Even though 2 days ago I felt 100% empowered. Max, if you had to tell people where the craziest situation that you woke up and realized, oh man, I made a bad decision, that would be hard to share that story. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not asking you to do that, because as I'm sitting here, I'm giggling going, oh my gosh. Like, sometimes as we've removed ourselves from active addiction, we realize the freedom we have today by not ending up back in those situations that were like, oh my gosh, how do I explain myself out of this one? And so I love the fact that you said that. But there always comes down to consequences and choices. And both of you have said that. Mm-hmm. So how do you speak to men and women who are listening to this saying, every time I make a choice. There's a consequence. I want to have this freedom. Where do I start?
Well, it's a funny thing. I tell my athletes and I tell my clients that if they want to be an addict, go out and be the best addict you can be. Like, go for it. But expect the consequences, because you'll have consequences of feeling good, of having great experiences, of having, some pretty interesting situations you placed in, but you're also going to have some bad consequences. There could be law enforcement, there could be death, there could be, like sickness and illnesses and homelessness. But that's the same thing. If you want to be someone sober, you could be the best sober person you can be, but expect those consequences. Consequences sometimes of sobriety kind of suck. Have you guys noticed? Responsibilities, all of a sudden you're worrying about things you didn't have to before. So it's one of these things where I think it boils down to, you can find the good in anything you're doing, but which has, I guess, a better return on your emotional investments. It's a hard thing to try and figure out on your own, like Max was saying. But it's a crazy thing, too, because I've seriously met people that have chose to be addicts and they wouldn't hurt a fly. And they are simply just happy. It's not my happiness. It's not what I would say would be my traditional kind of, I guess, experience of what freedom would be. But to them it is. And it's kind of an interesting thing, like who's right and who's wrong in a situation like that. And when I'm trying to help them see maybe the other side of the coin about what life could look like, they're perfectly happy being an alcoholic. And I'm like, I guess you find a certain sense of freedom there. It's not my sense of freedom, but the thing they don't have are long-lasting relationships. Their relationships are very subpar. And that's kind of a hard one too, because, people that I guess bite the hand that wants to try and help them and push that away. It's a lonely life to have, because these people don't want to invest in someone that they're going to lose. And so it's an interesting paradigm shift. And what a great question, Brock. What do you think, Max?
You say that, and you say, oh, they're perfectly happy with alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. But when I think of that, you know what they are? They're ignorant, is what they are, and they're living a life that barely qualifies as living.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. They think they are, but they're just getting by. Like, they're not living up to any potential or doing the things in life that they could be doing, and they're ignorant in their drug use, and they think they're okay. And they get to a point where they just accept it, and that's what they want to do the rest of their life. But it's ignorance. And, as I was thinking about this more, when we talk about the choices and stuff, addiction can almost take away your
for
agency.
Sure. Yes.
If that makes sense. It can take away your ability to make choices. So if you think of it that way, like, I'm losing my agency to this drug because I'm getting to the point where I don't have a choice other than to just use it, because that's how I'm getting by. So think of it as it takes away your agency. And for the people that think they're okay in their addiction, you are so ignorant to what you really could be doing in your life and the happiness that you could find, rather than just being okay all day using drugs.
Playing small, right, Max? Like seriously, playing small when you know that you could be doing something bigger.
Yeah. Ooh. Right.
Good point, Max.
Man.
Brock, what are you thinking?
Well, my question is right now, why is it so hard to be sober if there's so much freedom in it, right? And I look at, we've all seen these same people, like, it's almost, and so I'm going to go with what Max just said, that there's a lot of ignorance in it. I also think it's ignorance, and it's a lack of confidence in themselves. I don't want to go too deep into who this individual is, but I have this family member that kind of goes with if it's easy, if the situation, if I can find sobriety the easy way, I'll take it. But it's easier to stay in active use, because when your free agency's taken away, like you said, Max, when the agency's taken away, I've got one decision. That decision is get high. And it's almost that wash and repeat situation every day, to where it almost, there is some freedom in staying in active addiction, because all I got to do is find my next high. And if I do that, then I won, until I got to find my next high. But what happens is we lose our ability to grow, to pivot, to be anything bigger and better than we want to be, because nobody wants to be in active addiction. And when they're like, hey, I'm happy with who I am, they're full of crap. They've just settled to have their ability to choose taken away. Because I remember when I was for some reason, my pornography habit was way harder to overcome than my opiate addiction. Way harder. It was way more mental. It was way more psychological, because I'm like, it was a connection with my higher power, right? It was a worthiness thing. It was a personal thing. My free agency to act as I felt, let me back up. I felt like because the opioids were prescribed to me, I wasn't violating any rules until my addiction started getting out of control and I started using them different. But the whole
I justified it, right? Justification. Yeah.
But with the pornography, there was no justification. I couldn't rationalize the fact that God, in my mind, told me not to do it. But I was still repeating the same behaviors. And it almost felt like it transcended in all aspects of my life. It hurt my ability to be a good father. It hurt my ability to be a good husband. I didn't feel worthy to give my kids advice, right? I'm like, because in the back of my head, it's like, oh my gosh, you keep repeating and you're trying to be this man that you're not. Stop faking it. Stop faking it. And I kept hearing this. And so my ability to have that free agency to grow was diminished because of this addiction. So I hope that makes sense. And it's still one of the hardest things that I'm trying to overcome. It still has lasting effects in my life.
Yeah. Well, then I ask the question, like, when do we surrender that freedom in addiction, and how do we recognize that it's lost? Because like you said, there is a certain sense of freedom in knowing that there's only one thing you have to do, but I'm thinking that's still captivity though. How in the world do we blind ourselves to the fact that really that captivity of addiction, how do we convince ourselves that looks like freedom? Like, does that make sense? Like, you're right. I can totally understand the paradigm shift. I'm a firm believer that addiction forms in one of two ways. And this is something for 20 years I've been doing therapy and addiction counseling. I've noticed there's little patterns in this. And 9 times out of 10, I see the people that have a hard time with addiction are those who have experienced some kind of trauma or pain, and they don't know how to get rid of it. So they cover it with that substance of choice. When you boil it down to why people are actively using, it's because something hurt. Mental, emotionally, physically, spiritually, something hurt. And then we find that substance. So it's like if we're already covering something that sucked, or something we don't like about ourselves, or something that we experienced, that's a surrender of freedom right there, because you're not dealing with the mechanism of pain. You're not dealing with what caused the issue. You're hiding it, and hiding isn't freedom. So I love what you're asking, Brock, but how did you recognize that, like, wait a minute, this isn't freedom. I'm stuck here. This is captivity. Like, when do we figure out that we're being kind of bamboozled? What do you think,
Actually,
Max?
want that one, or?
Yeah, I'll take it. It's funny as I'm thinking about this, because I do think at the beginning we are making a choice to go to those drugs. So if I have that trauma in my life and I can't deal with it, I have two options. I can go get help, and I can go get the information and the counseling or whatever it is that I need, or we can very, very easily and willingly give up those freedoms for addiction. Because it starts and it's like, hey, this makes me feel better, more. Now we get to that slavery thing that we talk about. But I think it has a lot to do with this. It has a lot to do with perspective, and actually maybe even a little bit of gratitude of where we are, where we came from, and what's next for us in life. And we have to be able to step back a little bit and take that perspective, because if we think about it, if we can get out of our addiction, there is a limitless potential of where we could go after that, but we can't see that in our addiction. It's hard for us to take a step back and to understand that. But when we are able to fully recognize and acknowledge the self-imprisonment that we've given to ourselves in these drugs, is the only chance that we have of starting the process of getting back to sobriety. And we have to understand, and we have to be willing to do whatever it takes to do that. We have to refuse to continue to be victims of this thing. We have to refuse that I don't want to go back to these self-imposed prisons that I'm talking about that we gave to ourselves. We don't want to go back to this hell that we've gone in. We have to refuse to do it. So just some perspective on the whole thing is when we can, when we relinquish those being able to make decisions or that agency or whatever, we fall into that. But I think it has to do with some gratitude of where we are, some perspective of where we are. And when we can step back and say, look, I have way more potential than this, right? And I am going to refuse to keep myself in this hell that I'm in. And once we get to that point of refusal and we're not going to do it anymore, then starts the path to sobriety.
So Max, where did that hit in your lives? Because I'm thinking about that. It took 7-8 years in active use to start feeling that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, there was a bunch of times that I felt it, but I just couldn't get over it. Like I couldn't, my whole life I felt like I was able to will myself to overcome things or to face adversity, and I wasn't able to do that. So I would kind of get on I'd get motivation to do it, and it would only last a couple days because the motivation was a little bit false, right? It didn't come from deep down inside of a passion and a relentless desire to get over this stuff. It was superficial. It was like, yeah, I shouldn't be doing this. I need to stop. And the only reason why was because I knew there would be consequences if I didn't. But those consequences weren't enough for me to be able to stop. So again, self-imposed imprisonment of where I was at. So it can't just be the consequences. It can't just be, I might lose my job or my family or whatever. It's got to be, holy cow, I'm not going to be put in this prison anymore. Right? I refuse to be here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get out of it. So for me in my life, I had those moments, but they just didn't come from a deep enough place. I wasn't really ready to dive in to that trauma or whatever happened to me to be able to bring that to the surface, work on it, and be able to go forward with myself with self-respect and get rid of the guilt and anxiety from
So
there.
Max, if you didn't have, sorry, Blue, but
You're fine. I'm just agreeing with him.
I want the listeners to hear this. So what you're saying is, as mentally tough as you were, right? And we all know your story. You're a badass. Okay, you're very mentally strong. The only guy that will continuously go down a hill knowing he's going to get hurt. But even with that, it took intervention. It took people in your lives so you got arrested and then you got the help you needed. That's funny. You said I can either get help or I can get high. The two H's, right? Because in reality, there's no other option other than just continuing with the behavior. But if you're going to change, you're going to get help or you're going to get high. And so and what's funny is you don't see a lot of old-time drug dealers and users out there. There's not a lot of OGs of the drug world, right? They're either in prison or they're dead. And so what I'm saying is I want the listeners to hear, listen, Max, Blue, and Brock, we had to get help. Even as strong as we are, and granted, I always appreciate you saying, hey, that I went through it, but still, man, I was not in that process alone. I was not alone in that. I had some deep intervention from the man upstairs, and if he wasn't there, I would have went right back into it, right? And so I think the listeners need to hear this, that you come to a point in your life, no matter how mentally, physically tough you think you are, you got to get some type of help. And so I guess I'm going to ask Blue, because Blue's the expert here. Blue, where would you send these people, the parents that are listening, they want help, they need help, they need to either go seek treatment like Max did, they need to go a different route like Brock did. What are some immediate tools to start taking this freedom back?
So this is a cool thing, because I've got a very different view on the way that we tease out the reasons why people use, and you've gotten a little window into that just today. But going into that, you've got to find out where it's coming from. All of us have these funny little things called core issues, and these core issues are beliefs that we pick up along the way. And some of them get so bad and they hurt so deep that we create these thoughts around them that must be because of me as a person. And then those thoughts turn into feelings, and those feelings that hurt turn into your drug of choice. So the problem I see that most people don't want to do is they want to feel about addiction recovery, but they don't want to think about addiction recovery. And that's one of the hardest things. We live in a world right now where people will say, they'll say, I feel like the president of the United States of America is running this country into the ground. And I'm thinking, that's not a feeling, that's a thought. But if I say, I think he's running this country into the ground, well, then we can get into a debate, and I can shove my words into you, and we can debate this. But you cannot debate a feeling. So when we typecast ourselves into talking with feelings instead of thoughts, we already lose anyone helping us through a little bit of confrontation, a little bit of like pointing out some causality here. And so you'll see it all the time. You'll hear people say, I feel this and I feel that, when those are clearly thoughts. And so the hardest part about starting this whole process about breaking out of that captivity and gaining your freedom is to check your thinking. We think so little comparative to how much we try to feel about things. And what's funny is, say like for me, my core issue was neglect. Now, here's a hard thing, right? If I boil all of my life down into one single attribute at that point in time, which was neglect, what are my thoughts on neglect? People have a hard time with that. I could even ask you guys, what are your thoughts on neglect? And it's hard because people will automatically get into feelings. Well, I feel like it hurts. It's a sad thing. Those are feelings. What are your thoughts? Because those thoughts create feelings that create the addiction. Because no one goes to that core issue with thoughts. So the hardest part, man, about breaking that ice is to find out what duped you into thinking something false. And that whole concept of you adopting, neglect with me, my thoughts on neglect are, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought that I was the one who couldn't love. I thought that, I think that's, my fault for not doing enough, not being present enough, not helping my family enough. And so those thoughts create feelings of sadness and of guilt and of shame and of doubt. And then that's what causes the addiction. But it's when you're trying to tunnel out of a prison in your own mind, you're like with a little toothpick and like little stone trying to chip your way out of that thing. It's hard, man. But I think that's the biggest gatekeeper, is that people, they don't know their addictions, you guys. They feel their addictions. They don't think or know about their addictions. And when I start saying, what's at the core of this? It's like a deer in headlights.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I love how you said you're trying to dig out of the tunnel that you've created in your mind with this addiction, right? And the problem is you might be able to start doing it a little bit, and then you go, this is
Andy
too much.
Dufresne.
Like, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm just going to live in my cell and accept where I'm at, number one. And the other thing is a lot of people don't think they need help. They just don't. They think they can stop when they want, or they think it's really not going to affect them. And it was the same. It was the same with me. I didn't need help. I felt like I could stop it whenever I wanted to. Oh, it's not really affecting my life that bad. Like, it's making things better for me. So like, you start doing all of this justification, and it goes back to, after you do all that justification and you maybe tried to dig out of the tunnel and you can't, and it's like I said before, you have been taken over by the drug. You have mentally been taken over. And so the process for me is, I was mentally tough in sports and in school, whatever. I felt like there was nothing that I couldn't overcome. But when this thing took my brain over, I didn't necessarily have that same mental toughness and attitude about me. It took that over. And so I would just, like I said, I would get that motivation, be like, I need to get sober, but tomorrow. I'll get sober tomorrow, okay? This is my last pill that I have. I'm going to use it tonight, and tomorrow I'm getting sober. Well, guess what I'm doing at 6:30 a.m.? I'm sick. I mentally can't handle it. I'm calling drug dealers. I'm calling somebody to go find it. And then once I get high, I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can stop tomorrow. Then tomorrow comes and I don't. So that's the other cycle that you get in that I mentally can't break, because I can't mentally will myself on my own. So what happened to me is I ended up getting arrested. And lots of times there are things that happen in our life that can kind of propel us into sobriety, or at least the start. And when I got arrested and it's plastered all over the news and everybody knows my secret, going back and thinking about it, I thought to myself, holy shit, look what I have done. look what I have done. I have ruined everything. So then the next choice is, do I live with that and just continue on the path that I'm on?
Which would have been easy.
Right? Or do I refuse? That would have been the easy route. I would have lost a lot. I would have lost loved ones, but I could have just been like these people, okay with using and think that it's fine and I can function without it, which is obviously not the case. So I chose to refuse and to fight, but it took a while for that mental toughness to come back because I did not have it. It totally took that away from me, and I had to relearn how to get it back and how to gain that mental toughness that we're talking about to have clarity in the decisions that I'm going to make going forward in my life.
You know what's interesting about that too is the substances of choice. That's why I think that the worst drug anyone could ever use out there is like a anti-anxiety medication, like a Xanax or these medications that take away both feelings. You don't feel good on Xanax and you don't feel bad on Xanax. You don't feel anything. That takes away everything. That's why people that get into some of these medications like this, where they are just numb to the core, it's like that's the devil's drug, because that stuff should only be used so sparingly because you've got to face the trauma or the thing that's causing the distress. The only way to get over anxiety is to go through anxiety with a professional, with someone you trust, with someone you love. If you are constantly taking medication like that to get over that, and you're choosing the captivity of the drug to get you through whatever anxiety, it means you are afraid to face what is producing that fear, and that's hard for some people. And I've been down there. You don't know what I've been through. I can't imagine what you've been through, but I also know that if you're on that medication forever, you won't be here. You will be elsewhere. And Xanax and all those barbiturates, they don't make you feel good. They don't make you feel bad. They take away all freedom, even freedom of riding the high. And so, man, it's a scary thing when we surrender that freedom.
Man, you just said it though. I love what you said, guys. I hope you like put that in quotes. And I think we should put this on a shirt. Listen, you have to go through it. You got to go through it. You can't skip that step. I think that's so funny. So listen, if you're justifying your addiction right now, if you're embarrassed by your addiction right now, if you've tried to dig out and beat this thing, you can. If the drugs have taken over, you're going to be okay. If your brain is hijacked, listen, you need help. We all need help. Listen, we've all gone through it. So Max and Blue, here's a question. You've gone through it. You've been through there. You've done some crazy thing. You've woken up in some crazy places. You've been in the back of police cars. You've pooped all of yourself from withdrawals and coming off. I mean, let's be real. The question is when did you finally know that you could beat this addiction?
Powerful.
That's a great question. And you know what? I've talked about it a little bit before. I didn't have that mindset till probably a year after I got out of rehab. Like, rehab taught me to stop using drugs. Okay, great. Now I go back to real life, and Blue said it earlier, and I got all these responsibilities and bills, and I got to figure out what I'm going to do for a job or what's next for me in my life. And I kind of made the decision to sulk, to be honest with you. Still had it in my mind that, I was never going to gain that reputation back that I had before. And I kind of had to, like we talked about, I had to take a step back and realize I'm never going to be the guy I was before. That's never going to be me. Okay. I have to create my new self. And I got to the point for me where I realized that if I didn't really make a change, I was going to lose my family. And when I got to that point, whatever clicked inside of me changed. And I did all those things that I didn't want to do because of fear of having to do it. But I was able to just gut it out and do it because you're right, Brock. I can't remember exactly what you said, but you basically said the fear of facing those demons, right, is what keeps us back. And it's a lot easier to just numb those out and not have to deal with them. So I had to do all the little things that I did not want to do, guys. No one wants to do those things. It's scary. It's frustrating. It's depressing in some instances. Nobody wants to do that. I tried to hold off as long as I could and not do those things. And guess what? I just kept being more depressed. I kept having more anxiety. It just got worse and worse and worse until, okay, I'm going to have to go through something hard to achieve what I want. And so I'm going to do it as sucky as it's going to be. And you know what? It's funny. I had this conversation with Rex the other day, my son, and we're talking about football and, getting better and working hard and all that. And we were running some wind sprints and doing some stuff, and he's like dying, and he's like, man, this sucks. And I go, hey, I know it sucks, but you have to understand why you're doing this. Why are you doing it? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, you're doing it because it's going to make you better. And if you do this that sucks, it's going to make you better, and it's going to make you better in the game. Right? So sometimes we have to put in the things that suck to practice in order to compete in the game of life. And when you change that perspective, be like, this is suck, I'm going to have to put in the grind, but guess what? If I can get through it, I'm going to come out the other side a better person and with a better ability to take on these demons and this fear that I don't want to face. But I'm going to condition myself well enough that I can do it and gain a little bit of confidence, because once you get there and you overcome one thing, now you overcome another, and you work through this, that guilt and that shame and that embarrassment starts to go away. And, it's kind of funny, if I can real quick talk about the other weekend when I went back to that BYU Utah game. I didn't know how people were going to respond to me. I hadn't been back in a public situation like that in a really long time. I'm like, are people going to boo me? Are people going to make fun of me? Are they going to, but that wasn't the case. People cheered me on. People were grateful to see me. They loved to see so it took me years to the point that I'm at now, to where people have seen the change, and I have the confidence back, and I'm able to help others and do things like this. Well, I never thought I was going to be able to do. Blue, I remember doing your podcast years ago, just out of recovery. And I honestly had thoughts like, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, I'm not, who am I right now? Like, I have zero confidence in myself to do this. And I had more anxiety going into that podcast than I think I'd ever had in my life. Like, if Shay can do it.
Man.
But now I'm doing a podcast every week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so my point is, guys, those things will go away. They will. And you're going to be able to empower yourself and start living to your potential if you'll just put in a moment of work, just a moment of work. Okay. And it'll go by, and you're going to be better, and you're going to look back and be so grateful that you did that because of the results that you got from it. But that moment of work at that time seems so big that I don't know if I can overcome it. So if that makes sense of what I'm saying, it helps you get over the fear once you really make that decision and that refusal that you're not going to go back.
I once heard, Max, it takes 5 seconds of courage to do absolutely anything, and in that 5 seconds, it's you standing up. If you're going to do a public speech or something, to stand up and say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," and then you go. Or it's the 5 seconds of courage to say, dial the phone and say, "I need some help." You take 5 seconds to do anything. That's kind of a cool thing. That's all you need. And then the ball is in motion. Brock, that's a great question about that pivot point. And as Max was thinking, I'm like, man, what was it? What was it that got me from the captivity of addiction to the freedom of recovery? And I remember it. It came back, man. It was when I realized that it was all a lie. That it was all a big ass ugly lie.
And it's a lie that you created, right, Blue?
And I was thinking about that, because I'm thinking even how the drug affects our brain, it's a lie. It's a molecule that attaches onto a receptor to trick us into feeling a certain way. And so all those experiences that people want to say, well, I had a spiritual experience, an awakening, and I was so much more creative. No, it was a lie. That molecule in your brain convinced it that it needed this, that it was feeling this way. And so at the essence of it, it was a lie. And I started thinking about that as Max was talking to him. Like, I remember when I walked away from it all. And I'm talking about, like, I started realizing who my friends were. They were lies. They wanted me stuck in that addiction so that I could be that funny guy. I had their backs, that I could transport them places and we could get things together, and they were, in the squad together. They didn't care about me. I lost family members, my own mother and siblings. They walked away from me. They're like, no, man, we don't, who do you think you are, Mr. Holy, holier than thou? It was all a lie. And I got thinking, man, that is a hard thing. But I remember that day. My rock bottom, I call it, where literally too high to be even functioning and thinking, why do I even matter? And getting so close to taking it, to just losing it all and checking out of this life. And it was when I came up sober, hours and hours after that I got so scared, that I was so out of control that I almost lost my life to it. And holy cow, man, it was scary, but it was 100% when I realized that, wait a minute, this is all a lie. And I still look at it that way. That's one of the number one things I try to help people look at it as is you're not seeing this in the right light. You've got to take a deep look. And you can't do that when someone's high, man. They will justify their use to the ends of the earth. But yeah, when I realized it was all a lie.
And another thing for me, that I love that, because it really is a lie, and we make this stuff up in our head. Like, I made up a lie to myself that nobody wants anything to do with me. Nobody's ever going to be my friend anymore. No one's ever going to love me anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was a lie. That was a total lie that I made up. And then you have this fear and this anxiety of what people think of you, right? I started making up what people thought of me, or what I assumed people thought of me. And then I had to get to a point, I don't care what people think about me. I really don't care, right? If you love me and support me, great. If you don't, I could care less, because I'm not in it for you. I'm not in it for everybody out there.
Right.
But that's a hard shift, Max.
Because I want.
That's a hard shift.
It took me a year to make that shift, Brock. It took me a year to figure that out. And having to go through all of the things that I went through in that year. Yeah, I wasn't using. And I remember people would call me up and they'd be like, hey, Max, what are you doing? I'd be like, well, I'm just sitting here not using drugs or drinking alcohol. What are you doing? Just totally self-pity, sitting in my house, just like, what do you want from me? I stopped using. So can we just, but I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. And when I got to that point where it was about me and I could freaking care less what you think about me. So, and I thought about this, Blue, when you're talking about losing friends, losing family members, you had to make that decision of, you know what? I'm sorry. And that sucks for you that you want to do that and maybe close off our relationship. But I have to be a little bit selfish right now and think about me and what's best for me and the people that I'm going to put myself around and the help that I'm going to get and everything that goes with it. And that decision is what saved my life, when I just stopped caring. Outside of maybe my wife and family, I stopped caring what people thought about me or what people said to me.
And you have better friends today than you had then.
For sure. Deeper relationships.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've met a lot of cool people because of that. And there's a lot of good people out there who respect that. And it's something that they gravitate towards. As long as you're doing it in a positive way, right? You can not care what people think about you and be a total prick about stuff, which that wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to make myself better. And if you had a problem with that, all right, I'll move on from you. I don't need you in my life.
That. I've never heard anybody come up to me and say, I regret being sober.
Yeah.
Never heard it. But hey, I look at this panel, I look at you guys, man, and I'm absolutely grateful that you took your addiction and did something with it. Honestly, I mean, I see the impact that you guys are making, and I hope that people can hear this and feel this and see this, Max and Blue, they look at you guys and you guys are a beacon. People are reaching out. This thing with Max last week, think about all the new people that are contacting you and saying, Max, thank you. Hey, where do we go from here? How do we learn more? And had you buried it, like the Lord gives us these talents. It's something he gives us. If you buried it, nobody else is going to know. You're not a beacon of hope. And so a lot of people out there are going through this, and our invitation from the Agents of Recovery is, hey, it's time. Let's get some help.
Yeah, well, I saw it this weekend. Like I told you guys, I was in the middle of this cycling event, this race, 400 miles long, and in the middle of nowhere, some guy approaches me and says, "Addict II Athlete, Agents of Recovery, where's Max Hall?" I'm like, dude, what? Like, it was weird because I'm like, this is the coolest thing. And we talked for a while about his own addictions. He had a brother that was, played in the NFL too. Brother-in-law played in the NFL. Same thing. Got into the substance use, and it was cool because he recognized it, and that was the conversation I had after with another guy, was that being anonymous kills people. And this is something, and it was cool because he asked you too. He said, did you have to do a lot of convincing to get Max on the podcast? I'm like, no, not at all. Max isn't afraid to talk about this kind of stuff. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's been a vessel of freedom for all of us. And so it is kind of cool. The message is getting out there. And so listeners, that's our plea. I mean, continue to listen. We have, through Addict II Athlete's nonprofit status, you can donate and help Agents of Recovery move this message forward. The goal here is to get out further. The donations are fantastic. Sharing this podcast would help immensely. Retweeting things that Max and all of us post, those are big deals on how you can help this effort to help more people find that beacon of freedom. Don't you guys think?
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and kind of I know we're running out of time, but kind of a last thought. We've talked a lot about the slavery part of it, but people need to understand now what that freedom feels like. And we as addicts go through a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, to where we think we're going to be chained down to this thing forever. And it takes time and it takes a lot of work. But the freedom that I feel now of not having to think about drugs all day long, not having to call people and have the anxiety of trying to find it, even not having the anxiety of when my wife picks my phone up and hoping she doesn't go through it and look through whatever text messages or find something in my phone. The freedom of being completely open and honest about stuff, about accepting who I am and being able to communicate my struggles, especially to the people there's freedom in that, guys. It's a freedom and a happiness and a sense of peace that you will have in your life, which is better than any high you could get from any drug. Right? We don't think that in the middle of it, but I can feel it now. So when we talk about the freedom, it's the freedom to think about others and to serve others, the freedom to open ourselves up, to be honest. I mean, just the ability to tell the truth is a big type of freedom. And so that's where we want to get to. We still got to work on it every day, and we got to keep ourselves in check. But man, the potential of what we can do in our lives just elevates big time when that mind shift happens and we're no longer, tied down to this thing. So life can get so much better, and things can be so much better for you when you have and experience that freedom. But that pain and that anguish and that fear that you have to go through sucks at first, but no, it's going to be
100%. 100%.
Amen.
There we go. And you can help us. You can help us by donating through Addict II Athlete. You can help us by sharing this podcast. We really do put a lot of love and energy into these podcasts, and it was interesting. I could feel the energy that the agents today were putting together with Max and Brock and myself talking about these things, because we don't prepare for this. And I was, as Max was explaining his end, I thought, what is it? And so I hope that we are translating this message to you to think about these things, to share these experiences, to release yourself from the captivity of addiction into the freedom of recovery, because it's a beautiful thing on this side of that fence. Everyone loves a comeback, listeners. Everyone loves the underdog story. That can be you. And you can take it from us, the Agents of Recovery.